Welcome to Bookworthy, Linda.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here.
It is a pleasure. Now, our question of the week is, when you're having a bad day, what do you do to make yourself feel better?
We live in a really lovely town where you can walk downtown from our house, and I love to just go for a walk and get a coffee and sit in a park. We have a nice park that's just super restful, and usually I can pray and get my mind into a better place. So
it's amazing how just changing your environment can change your mood. And I love that, even when my kids are little, it was always, okay, we are in a mood, so that means we're either going to take a bath or we're going to go outside just to change the environment.
And both of those still work for adults. So
very true. Too fun. Now tell us a little bit about the title of this book. Hotel Oscar Mike Echo is a very unusual title.
And the inspiration came, I have a good friend who's from a military family, 3 generations. Her grandfather's a 3-star general. And somehow we would get together and we would just jokingly spell things out with the military alphabet. And so whenever I'm writing something, a lot of whatever's happening in my life currently ends up in a book. And that ended up being a very big part of the book. It's all the chapter headings. And
it took a while for my brain to get that in line.
Yeah.
I was like, yes. Okay, I'm not reading the words. I'm reading just the first letter. But right. It did. While I struggled with it at the beginning, it became a very integral part of the story as you moved out and how Sierra relates to other kids at school and how she communicates with people. So I love how that detail makes your book very unique for sure.
Oh, thank you. It's good.
Now, I also love how your book talks about several topics that might seem a little too adult for kids ages 8 to 12, like PTSD, homelessness, and addiction. But you have very relatable struggles for kids also, like making friends and bullying. What was your inspiration behind Hotel Oscar Mike Echo?
The inspiration came from several different opportunities where I have volunteered, and one of them is my husband and I teach parenting, and we have a jail here, a county jail, and so teaching parenting to the inmates gave us just some insight into what the kids at home are going through, and they're going through a lot of embarrassment and a lot of fear, and so it gave me just great compassion for her. And then my sons are all grown now. I have 4 grown sons, but when they were younger, we did read hard books to them and wanted them to have a sense of the world outside of our house our home felt very safe. And I wanted them to grow compassion, and so that's where some of that came from. And then so in the book, Sierra and her mom end up living in a transitional home for women and children needing a place to live, and it's called the Koinonia Home. And I used to volunteer there, teaching literacy, and so that's local here where I live in Illinois, but it is I moved it to Richmond, Virginia, where the story takes place. And it's the same. It's in an old school here in Illinois, and I moved it there, and it's in an old school there. So it's different pieces of my life, and then just a desire that there are kids living very hard realities, and I have heard from some of them already. And I sent a copy of the book, or the publisher did, to the transitional home here in Illinois that the book is based on, and they were just honored and thrilled, and they were having kids there read it. So it helps kids know they're not alone, that they're going through very, very hard circumstances, and they're not, people see them. So
I love that about the book, that even like you deal with these hard topics, but Sierra's need for friendship and acceptance is just so broad. It's about, all of us want acceptance and friends, and to learn to stand up for ourselves, and to be able to know the difference of when to physically jump into a situation or to physically step back. And I love that you're creating a opportunity for people to understand a world that is not expressed very often. With these, warriors coming home, we don't hear a lot about the stories of when they get home and having to deal with PTSD and what their families look like and the struggles that they go through. We do hear a lot of, what's going on in the other side of the world, but there's a whole world happening when they come home. And it definitely opened my eyes to elements of a soldier's family and story. And definitely my kids also had a lot of great questions, a great ability for us to have conversations about homelessness, about a little bit about racism, a little bit about just how our bodies react to different things. And so I love that you are tackling a hard topic for these young kids, because they're dealing with the same things, just not maybe as extreme, but still dealing with bullying, still dealing with trying to make friends and to relate to their peers. And I think that that's really sweet message that comes through your book for sure.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Now, Sierra loves to cook, and she prides herself on being able to make anything with just about 3 ingredients. Are you as creative in the kitchen as Sierra is?
I would say yes, and it can drive my husband crazy because he's an engineer and he follows a recipe to the letter, and it makes him crazy to watch me just throw things together and open the cabinet and put it. So yes, and I have one of my sons who, growing up, he always worked in restaurants, and he will always adjust whatever I'm making, and he's super creative with what he cooks as well. So yeah, it is. That's probably another way I enjoy using creativity, is cooking.
Very neat.
Yep. Thank you.
Well, what is it? I'm one of those people that I don't like to stick with exactly what is on the recipe, but I need to stick with what's on the recipe. I want to add creative flair, but I don't understand cooking very well.
Yeah, I get that.
There is an art to it for certain.
And there are occasional flops in our house. So oh well.
It's all part of the experience. I have 3 picky eaters too, and so finding food that everybody eats is always an event in our house. And so my kids will come down like, "Mom, this doesn't smell good." And I was like, "Well, if Mom and Dad don't like it, then we will order other food." So we will find something else. But we're trying something new.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, goodness. Got to stretch them where I can.
Yes.
But Linda, with this book, what do you hope to communicate or for kids to take away from this story?
I would hope, and my hope is that kids really do experience compassion for anybody in their schools who might be struggling or in their life. One of the questions I read somewhere, I don't even know who to credit with this, but it was a parent who always asked their child when they came home from youth group, who did you sit with today who wouldn't have had anybody else sit with them? Mm-hmm. And I did not ask that to my kids, but I wish that I did. And so I think I would love kids to learn that God wants us to care about the hurting. And one of my favorite scriptures is Micah 6:8. He has told you, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires of you, but to do justice and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. And I would love that to cover young readers, that do we desperately need that in our world, from all of us in the church, outside the church, that where we are showing compassion and care. So that would be my hope. And yes, it is a young age to start talking about it, but it also feels like a formative time to consider just a posture toward life where you are looking out for those who are hurting.
Yeah, and it's interesting because with my 3 boys, my oldest started experiencing bullying in 3rd grade, and that's 8 and 9, and that's, wow. That's really young. And so I feel like they are topics that need to be brought to these young kids, because they're experiencing it younger and younger, where most of bullying, I guess, for me and my husband when we were in school was more in middle school is when that happened. But it's trickling down, and it's definitely something that sneaks in there that you don't know what to do with.
Right.
But the more kids can see themselves in characters that are experiencing those things, can equip them not just to handle that situation, but to emotionally cope with those situations too, and to see people not just for, oh, that's the weird kid that sits by themselves, but that's a person that could be hurting and could be having a hard time, or why isn't anyone sitting with them? Are they new? Just asking those questions, looking outside of ourselves, which kids have a hard time doing, and even I have a hard time doing. And adults, I will admit. Exactly. Now, when did your writing journey begin, Linda?
I started enjoying writing when I was in high school, and it was more poetry and short stories, and I did feel like I wanted to go off to college and study writing. I ended up doing communications, which was not specifically creative writing. There's a little bit of regret there, but and then we ended up having 4 sons, pretty close together, twins at the end there, and so in my mind, I wanted to write novels and I wanted to write fiction, and that was put on hold for a long time. And I know there are people who juggle kids and novel writing, and I am not one of those people. So I began to write seriously when my kids were middle school or high school. But it was what I was publishing was nonfiction, like creative nonfiction, and writing content and I wrote some columns and that kind of thing. And, but they did get picked up. And then I finished a novel for adults. And that was the first book that I wrote to completion. And then Hotel Oscar Mike Echo was the second book. So.
Very neat. Now, what has been, I guess, did you always want to be an author? You kind of answered this a little bit, that it's always something in the back of your brain. But is it something that you, I don't know, just naturally fell into?
I think ever since, so I remember writing a poem when I was in high school, and I don't know if I still own it, but it was on acceptance. And I remember finishing it and thinking, I just learned something from that, which, I wasn't a Christian at the time, but I really feel like that was almost a call in my life that, and so in the back of my mind, I did want to write in some way. And then in my 20s, I became a Christian, and then, writing takes on a different style and purpose and all of that. But so I would say since I was a teenager, I wanted to be a writer, but it took a lot of practice for me. So
like, even for those that it comes easy, it still takes a lot of work. I have my teenage son he wants to write stories, and he just struggles getting things down on a paper. And I was like, look, bud, 10% of it is, getting it on the paper. The 90% is editing. It's like, it doesn't have to be perfect, the first time down. And he struggles with that. Like, no, it has to be perfect. Like, no, just get it down. That's the hardest part.
That's great advice for him, because I think that revising part is where there's so many interesting things that come out. It can be very fun and creative. And so good advice, Mom.
Thanks. Every once in a while, right? Now, did any of your boys head to the military?
No, they all went off to college. So my dad was in the military. My father-in-law was in the military, more that generation. Gotcha.
Okay, then here's the hard question, military question.
Okay.
All right, which branch of the military?
Was my father?
Your father, yes.
I think both my father and my father-in-law were in the Army, and neither of them, it was during the Korean War, and neither of them went off into battle or anything. They were doing kind of administrative work. So
very cool.
Well, that's a good question. I'll have to go confirm.
Well, my family is an Air Force family, and my husband's family is an Army family. Okay. And when we first got married, there was a big conflict over the way we folded the sheets under our bed. And so it's always this funny ways like, okay, is it the way we do it? Is it Army better to folding sheets, or is it the Air Force way? So it's always fun to kind of see people's reaction to just the different branches, because there's definitely a culture in each.
Yes. My father, I just always remember him, like his shoes were perfectly lined up. Like he learned that neatness in the military. Our garage was perfect. And so order.
Order. Yes. Because if you don't, then you're running another lap.
Yes. Yeah.
Too fun. Now, Linda, what has been the most impactful book in your life other than the Bible?
Yeah, my first answer there would be the Bible, but that's like the Sunday school answer. I have I would say there's a couple of nonfiction books that I have really loved. One is The Hole in Our Gospel by Richard Stearns, and he was I don't think he's the head of World Vision anymore, but when he wrote the book, he was. And he's really talking about it's kind of a hard word for Christians, but to really care about the poor and the hurting and the people living on the margins. I took that to heart. And another book that I loved, and I read this probably as an early Christian, the book Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster is broken down into different spiritual disciplines, but he wrote this one chapter on simplicity, and it was my absolute favorite chapter in the book. At the time, I had 4 young kids and my life was chaos, so I think the idea of simplicity sounded great. But he wrote a whole book based on that chapter called Freedom of Simplicity, and that's also a book I took to heart. It was freedom, it was simplicity, and how we spend, how we live our lives, how we use our time, and for the purpose of having it to also give away. And so I've taken that to heart over the years, which is good.
I think that's really countercultural, because we are always like, let's do the thing, do this, especially with kids at home. And I think we do long for that simplicity and that rest that, God asks of us in his word. And I think that there's some real good wisdom there. I even have that Celebration of Disciplines book by Foster too. I was like, where is that? I was challenged the most by the fasting chapter in that Celebration Disciplines book, just because it's, again, not something natural in our culture to bring fasting in. And it's been an interesting challenge through motherhood and
have you read it recently, or did you read it a long time ago?
Let's see, what was it? I guess about 15 years ago is when I read it. And making a habit of bringing fasting in those times where I'm trying to make a decision or really need God's guidance has been a new discipline. So
wonderful.
It's been good. But so your first book was for adults, and then Hotel Oscar Mike Echo is for kind of that middle grade audience. What made you make the jump from adults to middle grade?
I had always, when my sons were young for a couple of years, we homeschooled, and I did a literature-based curriculum with them. And so I have, a library filled with kids' books that I just loved. And there really was, in the back of my mind, just different ideas. And so this came about. It just felt like a nice way to pull all of these pieces together, where I had been thinking about kids in hard circumstances. And one other piece about the inspiration, a friend of mine, for a number of years lived in the inner city of Richmond, where the story takes place, as a single woman, and worked for a ministry there where they tutored and taught classes for the kids in the neighborhood. And she really inspired me, and I was able to stay with her for a while and attend some of their classes and meetings and see how they were investing in the kids. So that just got longer. Does that answer the question?
Yes. No, I love I can't remember their names, but the two that run the Kimono Home.
The Goodwins.
Yes, the Goodwins. I love their heart. And it's like we can all think of a Goodwin character in our own lives. They're like, they just were home to me, and they, were inspiring and made me feel safe. And I love that just your experiences really fed into creating this home, this ministry, these people. And I really love what you did with the book to really make it accessible for kids in these hard topics, to allow them to see something and to relate to it. Because I think that's kind of the goal of books around middle grade age, is just to help them see beyond themselves. And I love that your book does that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, what can we expect next from you, Linda?
I did finish a third novel, and this is back to writing for adults, and it's with my literary agent at the moment. So I'm waiting for that one to be, sent out and hopefully find a home. And then with the way that Hotel Oscar Mike Echo ended, I always wanted to write a follow-up, and I already have some ideas. We will see. I guess it's, I don't know if the publisher is interested in doing that or whatever, but I think I'm going to write it. I'm going to write a follow-up to her, because I feel like there's more to her story, and I just really, and I love the characters. That's the hardest part about writing fiction, is you put the end at the end of a book, and you've really gotten to know these people. And so I was sad to say goodbye to her.
I know, she is such a sweet character, and I love that even in the trials and the hardship she's going through, she has a hope of, I'm going to be on a cooking show one day. And just, there's that hope and that promise that you put throughout the book, just that she's not so focused on her situation to get lost in it, but she just continually has hope for something else. And she does that great with the little boy that she helps with his math and, in his situation. And so I would love to see more about Sierra's story and how just her home develops, which isn't so much a place, but a group of people. So yes. I love that.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Well, where can people find out more about you and your books, Linda?
I have a website it's my name, lindamckillop.com. And I am on Instagram and Facebook as Linda McKillop Writer. So people can find me there.
Well, I hope people will reach out and discover more about your books and all that you're doing with your writing, because I really have enjoyed getting to know you and getting to know your book here in the last few weeks as I've been reading through it. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It means a lot. Appreciate it.
And thank you for joining Linda and me on this episode of the Bookworthy podcast. Check out the show notes for any books or links that we discussed, and let us know in the comments what you like to do to turn a frown upside down. Be sure to like and subscribe so we can discover more great books together. Happy reading.